each man must do his bit.
Welcome to another edition of The Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and on this series of programs, we examine issues of interest to the Guyanese people at home and in the diaspora. And at present, we're concerned with what is happening in our schools, with our school children, with our teachers, and the entire education system. What we saw at the PPP Congress early in May was vulgar. The skit that was put on in front of members of the People's Progressive Party at the highest decision-making forum was vulgar. It was the highlight of the PPP's 32nd Congress, but it highlighted the mentality of the PPP, that they should even consider putting something like that in the public. It exposed the PPP's contempt for our teachers. It explained why the PPP has refused to negotiate in good faith. And it probably extended the plight of the teachers from the classroom and the conference room into the dance hall. But it was counterproductive. And I hope that in our political culture, we never see something like that again. Teachers in every country, in every jurisdiction, occupy an almost sacred, position in society. In Guyana, our teachers' union was established 140 years ago in 1884. 140 years. It is not a fly-by-night, NGO. It's a solid and well-established organization. UNESCO pays homage to the teachers. UNESCO declared World Teachers' Day to be observed every year. UNESCO's objective is, let me quote directly, to ensure that teaching is transformed everywhere into a more attractive and valorized profession where teachers are valued, trusted, and adequately supported to meet the demands of every learner. Bold actions must be taken if we are to reverse the current decline and successfully increase the teachers' numbers. It reads as if this is something that was written for Guyana yesterday or last week. If we are to reverse the current decline and successfully increase teachers' numbers. Where are we today in Guyana with the crisis involving the state and the teachers? There are about 1,275 schools in the public education system. Many of the school buildings, for example, in my day, were built by the Christian churches, the Anglicans or Catholics or Presbyterians, Methodists, Congregationalists, Lutherans. And many of them are old wooden buildings. Some of them don't have functional toilets. You have to go outside to a latrine. They don't have electricity. Things are getting better now. But our teachers have to work in very difficult circumstances, pre-modern circumstances. These buildings, which are built in the colonial era, have not yet been modernized. There are about 12,000 teachers in the public education system. A major employer. The state is a major employer of teachers. And about 85% of those teachers are women. Well, women tend to be mothers. They tend to be married and they tend to get children. So many of the issues affecting our teachers are peculiar to women who are mothers. 85% of the teachers just happen to be women. And in addition to the other problems at school, mothers have to find money to send their children to school. And sometimes it can run into like $6,000 a month. That, my friends, is one of the reasons why I introduced the public education transport system, because I sat down with students at President's College and elsewhere, and they told me how much their parents were paying to get them to school. So, for the first time in the history of this country, we had 3 school buses. Well, true, they were not new. We didn't have money to buy new buses. But it was an effort to get children to school on time. And it was working until the present regime scrapped it. Anyhow, many mothers or many teachers who are mothers are spending up to $6,000 in some cases to get their children to school. And then, as you know, after school lessons, sometimes they end up paying another $6,000. So teachers' salaries are not just there to make them rich. Teachers have responsibilities, and we must listen to them so that we can pay attention to their real needs. And many teachers, unfortunately, have to resort to running private lessons, extra lessons, to selling snacks to students. This is degrading. But they have to make ends meet to cover their household expenses. And in the hinterland, let me tell you, life is very, very difficult. And I think if any one of you had to spend a night or a weekend in the teachers' quarters in one of these hinterland locations, you'd get a good idea of how teachers live. You know, you'd see one bucket for washing clothes, one bucket for bathing, one bucket for flushing the toilet. They don't live a life of luxury. And many people in the hinterland, teachers, policemen, other public servants, have to pay exorbitant prices for household needs, for food. So everything costs more in the hinterland. Everything costs more in the hinterland. So the life for teachers in the hinterland is bad. Maybe life for teachers in the coastline is not so bad, but the cost of living is really very, very difficult. And the teachers strike. There are 2 strikes already. 2 strikes for 2024. They're completely justified. Completely justified. The cost of living is high. The prices of basic food items is high. The cost is high. And the cost continues to increase. Teachers' salaries are inadequate. And their lives are difficult. And if you want a quality education system, we don't have to think about bringing people from Bangladesh or Cuba or anywhere else. We can make life better for teachers here. I have been to Bahamas. I went to a Bahamas primary school, and there were 22 graduate Guyanese teachers in a primary school in the Bahamas. They're leaving in droves because the teaching profession in Guyana is uncomfortable for them. One of them met me and reminded me that I taught him history at University of Guyana. They're not happy being there, but they have to make a living. And you know, we've lost a lot of teachers, what they call the 4Bs, the Botswana, Barbados, Belize, and the Bahamas. And Guyanese teachers are holding up those systems. If in one primary school in the Bahamas you could have 22 Guyanese graduate teachers, you can imagine what's happening around the world. But despite their difficulties, the PPP civic is making life difficult. It's not a question of ethnicity. It is not a question of sincerity. Teachers of every ethnicity admit that the cause of this strike action is the same: inadequate salaries and disregard or sometimes insultive behavior about salary negotiations. Teachers have complained and we have listened to them. They cannot afford to live a decent life on their salaries. And the High Court is aware of this, and the High Court has ruled that the GTU's attempts to negotiate with the state, with the government in good faith, have been rebuffed. The GTU, I can't go through the whole chronicle of events, but the GTU has submitted a multi-year proposal, and I must admit that the submitted proposal to the APNU AFC government, and I personally met with the teachers, and we were able to work out a solution. And they did put on a strike, and I met with them personally. I'm not afraid to sit down and speak to the teachers. But we didn't have $1 trillion budget. The APNU didn't have $1 trillion budget, but now people are boasting about fastest growing economy and trillions of dollars spending. They're giving contracts to all types of critics and all types of people who never built anything. But the attention that is paid to this important sector is driving people out of the country. The PPP has failed to respect the rights of workers to collective bargaining. The workers are asking to be met by the administration. Instead, the administration called people to State House and on private meetings, undermining the authority and the influence of the union. The Constitution gives the union the right to take the action that it took. The laws of Ghana give them the obligation for negotiation under the Trade Union Recognition Act. And we expected that these negotiations would take place in good faith. Unfortunately, in February this year, there was one strike, 29-day strike, and then another strike had to be called in May. The PPP administration has reacted in a hostile manner. It threatened to cut teachers' salaries, to discontinue deductions. Everything the PPP does, is so far removed from conciliation. Everything is a threat and an insult, like that crazy skit at the Congress. They're trying to decertify and undermine the union's legitimacy. The union had to approach the court. This matter should never have reached the court. And they feel that the deduction of the salary is a deprivation of property. And they feel that they have a right to be heard before determining that they will discontinue serving as an agent to deduct, getting the union or the government to deduct union dues and wages for teachers. So the High Court had to intervene to protect the constitutional rights of the teachers and the unions. So the first strike was called, then the second strike was called, and as you know, the High Court recommended mediation. So the union did engage in mediation. And what I would say is that it was only because of the failure of mediation that the union resorted to its second strike. And I may be wrong, but it was directly after that insultive and vulgar skit at the PPP Congress that people seem to realize that the PPP is not serious about negotiation. In the middle of a negotiation, you put on an insultive, vulgar skit attacking the teachers' strike. They seem to mock the teachers, make fun of the teachers. That is what it's all about. The teachers have been insisting that the negotiations cover their pay demands over the period 2019 to 2023. And the government has a different point of view. And the government wants to negotiate from 2024. Well, there's a difference there, and that's one of the reasons why they went to negotiation. What I see here, my friends, is that there is a clash of cultures. What is taking place between the government and the teachers is not a matter of miscalculation. It's not about misinterpretation. It's not about misunderstanding. it is a direct result of the PPP as a party, um, the PPP's mindset to exercise totalistic control over all of the institutional state. You see the same thing happens in local government, the same thing happens in the attitude to the American People's Association, same thing happens in the attitude to the Ghana Public Service Union. It doesn't happen to GAHU, but it happens to all of the rest. Totalistic control. And from the start, the PPP tried to depict the teachers' strike as political. You have teachers who have articulated their grievances, hinterland teachers, public school teachers, graduate teachers, pointing out that their salaries just cannot suffice to keep body and soul together. And it, by no stretch of imagination, could the PPP's claim be associated with the Partnership for National Unity and the Alliance for Change. And to accuse the union of being political and of the strike of being political is stupid, quite silly, because there's no evidence of this, and it is just intended to divide the teachers between those who support the APNU and those who don't. Well, this is not an issue. This is a bogus issue. The teachers' union and the teacher strike is not controlled by APNU. It's not controlled by the AFC. And every intelligent guy needs to understand that. But the PPP at the highest level continues to propagate this crazy claim that the strike is political. And that seems to be the resort in every clash it has with civil society and the unions and certain unions, that as long as you don't agree with the PPP, it is political, inspired by APNU or AFC. The fact is that the PPP has been reluctant to sit down and negotiate with the GTU, the Ghana Teachers Union. And it has been at pains to try to prove that the GTU is a political entity and that the strike is politically inspired. I don't want to talk history on this program, but it is difficult to separate what is taking place today on the streets of the regional capital, Ghana, Regina, or New Amsterdam, or Linden, or Georgetown, with what happened, 60 years ago, when the unions were treated in a very disrespectful and disparaging way by the PPP government of the day. And the PPP seems to have borne this grievance for the last 6 decades, feeling that once a union strikes, it is out to attack the PPP or remove the PPP from government, which is not true. And they've carried this bias for these decades, and they refuse to deal with representatives of certain unions in a humane and realistic manner. And what the teachers are pointing out, they look at the figures, and you can see that the salaries we're receiving are inadequate to meet our daily needs, our household needs. And when we look, every time the PPP comes into office, in 1961, they came back in office in 1992, then again in 2015, now again in 2020. You can see that there's this pattern of insults, pattern of attacks against legitimate unions. And it shows that over a long period, the PPP mindset has not changed. And I personally feel that the skit that they put on at the PPP Congress was deliberately insulting, but it has a long history. that unless the PPP controls an activity or an organization, it is branded as being oppositional. And regardless of the fact that they've attempted to remove the so-called phrase of Marxism, Leninism from the Constitution, Leninism is a mindset. It's not a sheet of paper. They can change the Constitution all they want. But Leninism is not Marxism. Marxism is an economic theory which is perhaps no longer relevant now. It certainly mobilized workers around the world to get better conditions. Marx was a philosopher. Lenin was a politician. And Lenin believed in terror. One of his famous quotations is that the purpose of terror is to terrorize. Lenin believed in totalistic control, that the purpose of political activity is to seize the state. And once you seize control of the state, it dominates everything. It is the ultimate paramount organization in the state. And regardless of the erasure of Marxism, Leninism from the Constitution, the mindset is still there. And what we see happening is that the PPP refuses to see other civil society organizations, all civil society organizations, as legitimate expressions of the people's interests. And that is why we are at this impasse today, that it's not a question of ethnicity. It's not a question of whether the teachers are entitled to better. It's a question of PPP simply demanding total control and total submission. That when the year comes around, the PPP will hand out 6.5%. Whether or not, the statistics show that the workers, the teachers deserve 10, 15, or 20%. The PPP intends to do exactly what it likes. And that is the problem we're facing again. These are legitimate organizations of the teachers. And by engendering distrust, by devaluing teachers' service, the PPP itself is harming the national good. The PPP is willing to import teachers. The PPP is willing to import teachers from foreign countries who probably will have a serious language problem. And, because they are bound by contracts, PPP control the contracts. And that is the problem for the PPP. They want to bring teachers who they can control, even though it damages the local education system. So all around the country now, we're hearing about importing nurses, importing teachers, importing technicians, instead of training our own people to take positions of authority in these important fields. This attitude is forcing public servants, it's forcing teachers to leave the country in droves. People want to remain in Ghana. They want to serve their families, their communities, their villages, where they grew up, but the PPP is making it very difficult for them. And more or less, the PPP is forcing people out of the country, out of the land that they've worked, where they want to remain and create a good life for themselves and future generations. But the attitude PPP has assumed towards the GTU historically has achieved the opposite effect. People are fleeing because of the PPP totalistic mindset. Let us hope, and I know that hope is not a good planning strategy. Let us hope that the PPP could change its attitude to our teachers, sit down with them and give them something which is reasonable and which helps them to fulfill their obligation to the children of this country and helps them to fulfill that objective of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO. And let me close by quoting what UNESCO had to say. The objective is to ensure that teaching is transformed everywhere into a more attractive and valorized profession, where teachers are valued, trusted, and adequately supported to meet the needs of every learner. Bold actions must be taken if we are to reverse the current decline and successfully increase teachers' numbers. In this way, my friends, I think we can look forward to a good life in Guyana if our government accepted the UNESCO definition of the role of teachers in our society. Thank you, and may God bless you.